Greetings, Jacobins, Montagnards, Girondists, and Royalists. Coming from the high school library here. Review for AP Euro Unit 6 on the French Revolution and on Napoleon. And I'm going from top to bottom on your review sheet. 1789 is a dividing line year. Before that, you have the old regime. This is the old social order before the Revolution. And you have, after 1789, this new world of revolutionary and post-revolutionary France and Europe. The fall of the Bastille, the significance is this is a very symbolic event with symbolizing the fall of the Bourbon dynasty, the end of the old regime as seen in the of Louis XVI. And the first and second and third estates, you should know these parts of the social order. At the very top, the clergy and the monks and nuns and so forth. That's maybe 1% or so of France. This is the first estate. A couple percent is the second estate. This is the aristocracy, the nobility. And these are the two estates that control most of the wealth of France, and they are not taxed. The third estate, for a millennia or so, is the peasants. These are the serfs, and then later the peasants in modern France here. But the growing group within the third estate are the bourgeoisie. These are the people in the cities. These are the professionals in the big cities. These are your merchants, your bankers, your traders, your small factory owners, your professionals, your doctors, your lawyers, the philosophes. And they come to the estate general, which is this meeting that the king calls because he's out of money, and he doesn't have any more ability to squeeze taxes out of the third estate. So they're going to come with this cahier de doléances, and that's a little bit farther down on your review list. And the complaints are they haven't met for 175 years, they've been ignored, and some of the things which will change with the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, complaints about religious persecution, complaints about corruption, complaints about exclusion, complaints about the loss of ancient liberties, complaints about lack of liberty, of censorship, complaints about serfdom. So there's this huge list of complaints that are coming by the members of these estates to the meeting of the Estates General. This is the French Parliament in 1789. The grievances are ended by the French Revolution. Just a little up front here, the Estates General had not met for almost 2 centuries, 175 years, and now they're meeting. They have a National Assembly, and it has various permutations, becomes a Legislative Assembly, and then a National Convention. But this is a regular meeting of elected members of a French Parliament or a French Assembly. Religious persecution ends with freedom for both Protestants and Jews. The third estate's exclusion from power ends as you end up with voting as individuals in the National Assembly, and then later universal manhood suffrage under the National Convention when France becomes a republic. Lack of liberty is changed by the end of censorship, by free speech, by free press, by fair trials, and serfdom ends early on in the Revolution as the Estates General will end serfdom, will end the privileges of manorialism, and all professions will be open to the government. All positions in the government will be open. All positions will be open. The exclusiveness of guilds ends with the end of feudalism. The Estates General is called into session again because the king is broke. He's out of money. He has fought 2 very expensive wars. One he's lost, and that's the 7 Years' War, 1754 to 1763. And the big loss here is North America. Canada has been lost to Great Britain in the Treaty of Paris, 1763. The Second War, which is a French victory, is where they back the Americans, and this is out of revenge for losing the 7 Years' War / the French and Indian War in America. But this is a very expensive war. The French send soldiers, they send their navy, they give lines of credit, they give weapons to the Americans, and they get their revenge here. And the Brits lose control of North America. The Americans get independence, but France is shackled with this huge, huge debt. And there's a bad harvest in 1789, and the king is stuck sort of begging the first and second estates to sort of loosen up on some of their privileges and to give him some taxes. The causes of the French Revolution: bad harvest, 2 very costly wars, and anger at Louis XVI's wealth and his decadence and his sort of imperial absolutism over all these years, while the rest of France is suffering, both in the cities with high cost of bread and in the provinces because of this bad harvest. The tennis court oath is when the third estate refuses the old system of voting by group, where the first estate voted as a group, the second estate voted as a group, and the third estate voted as a group. The third estate would always get outvoted. So the third estate is demanding to vote. The delegates should vote as individuals. And they're locked out of Versailles. They meet in a tennis court, maybe more like a racquetball or handball court. Anyhow, that's called the tennis court. And they take an oath that they will not disband until they have a new constitution. And I have here the eponymous painting. That's an example of neoclassical art, and eponymous means it's naming something. The name of the painting is the name of what it shows, and that is the tennis court oath by David. And this is a painting where it's portraying the French as the new Romans. The Romans are giving this oath, kind of like the Oath of the Horatii, which is another painting by David, which is about these Romans who are going on, taking a vow that they'll fight for the freedom of Rome. We're talking about the Roman Senate here. This is all pre-Julius Caesar, the free Romans, the Romans that ruled themselves through a Senate. Cahiers de doléances, this is the list of complaints at the Estates General. Something akin to the Grand Remonstrance. Remember this complaint against Charles I that's going to lead to the English Civil War. The Women's March on Versailles. Why? Well, there's hunger in Paris. There's a shortage of bread, and the feeling and the belief is that Versailles has warehouses full of bread. And these women march, and there's about, they're in the thousands, well over 10,000, are going to march on Versailles, and they're going to break through the fence, and they're going to kill a bunch of the guards, and they're going to bring the baker, the baker's wife, and the baker's boy, the king, the queen, and their son back to Paris, where they're going to be held in the Tuileries Palace, kind of under house arrest. But the anger here is over the suffering, and the feeling the king is not just not doing anything, but that he's indifferent to this suffering. Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen. This is a list of specific rights: rights to a trial, rights to charges, rights to free speech, freedom of the press, freedom of religion, to participate in government. These are rights that are listed by this new National Assembly. And the rights are coming from the nation. This is a little bit different than John Locke and his rights coming from individuals. The feeling here is that the rights come from the general will, from the nation, from the larger group. And that would be from Mr. Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the French Enlightenment thinker. The Declaration of the Rights of Woman, this comes from Olympe de Gouges, and she is essentially a feminist. And important to note here, when the French Revolution is all said and done, women don't get any rights. And this might make you think a little bit of the Declaration of Sentiments that's coming out of Seneca Falls, if you remember your APUSH class in 1848. List of all these demands to have access to education, to government, to jobs. And this, it's a complaint, but it doesn't pay off at this moment. In fact, Olympe de Gouges is one more person who's going to be guillotined when things go a little berserko in the later revolution. Feudalism in France after 1789 ends. That's one of the things that happens. There is what's called the Great Fear early on in the revolution, where the peasants are rising up, and there's this panic, and feudalism is ended very early by the Estates General. Enlightenment ideas fulfilled in the French Revolution. Jean-Jacques Rousseau has this idea of the general will, that the democratic majority, their will should be what is followed, that rights come from this larger group, this larger democratic group. Voltaire is a person who is pushing for freedom of expression, specifically freedom of religion. He's a critic of the wars of religion, which tore France apart, and he's got this famous phrase, crush the infamous thing, where she's referring to putting the Catholic Church in its place. The Baron de Montesquieu is famous for his Spirit of the Laws, in which he talks about the need for checks and balances. The ideal government is a combination of legislature, executive, and judiciary, and he's looking across the English Channel, and he's looking at the British, who have, before the French, limited the power of the king, have set up what's called a constitutional monarchy. Locke is someone who says that we're born with rights, with natural rights, that freedom is a God-given right. And this is not something that the French revolutionaries don't believe, although they're seeing that the rights are not coming from just individual people, but from individual, not individuals part of a group, but as from this larger group, the general will. Shifts from the Estates General to the National Assembly, to the Legislative Assembly, to the National Convention. Remember, the Estates General is this parliament where the king calls them to meet by group. The tennis court oath is where the rebel, dissident, third estate with allies from the first and second estate meet, and they say they demand a new constitution. They're going to set up a Declaration of Rights of Man. They're going to vote as individuals, and the king, under duress, will sign this new constitution. New election will put into place a legislative assembly. At this point, France has a constitutional monarchy. The king is still in power. Remember, right away in the revolution here, they're not killing the king. They're not executing people right off the bat. They want and they get a limited monarchy, a constitutional monarchy. When France goes to war and the rest of Europe goes to war against France, the government will get very paranoid, and the king will be demoted. He'll become a mere citizen under the National Convention. Universal manhood suffrage will be declared. There will be this Jacobin republic with the National Convention. This convention will be bogged down in both foreign war and in civil war in places like the Vendée. There's rebellions in Marseille, rebellions in Lyon, and this is going to lead to sort of hunting down those who are disloyal, those who are traitors, those who are counter-revolutionary. Differences between an absolute and a constitutional monarchy. We spent a lot of time on this in the third unit here, where in Great Britain you have, through the English Civil War, which executes Charles I, and through the Glorious Revolution, 1688, that kicks out James II because fear that he's going to become an absolute Catholic monarch. And they go shopping, they bring over William and Mary, they being the Parliament. This ascendancy of Parliament, putting the king in his place, is constitutional monarchy. There are these things that Charles signs, you got the Magna Carta much earlier, but you have the Petition of Right signed by Charles I, you have the Habeas Corpus Act, and then you have William and Mary signing the Bill of Rights. And in these separate rights, you have a list of all of these rights that Englishmen have. And this is a constitutional monarchy, which the French are going to impose, are going to adopt early on. An absolute monarchy, of course, is where you can do something like not call the Estates General for 175 years, where you rule very imperiously. And the classic example of that is Louis XIV, who in Versailles has got all these thousands of nobles who are at his beck and call, who are giving him his slippers when he gets up out of bed, and who are, passing him his socks and his underwear. He's humiliating them and debasing them, and he has them in a very subservient position, and he's doing whatever he wants. The Jacobins, these are the radicals who sit in the assembly, in the Legislative Assembly, and they are the ones who want a republic. They want to end this constitutional monarchy. And they're the term left wing. We get this because they sat on the left side of the assembly, and on the other side of the monarchists are the royalists, the people who want to keep the king and want to sort of keep the status quo as close to possible. One other thing about the Jacobins, they do want to regulate the price of bread. They're very sensitive to the street mob, the sans-culottes, the people in Paris who depend on cheap bread to get by. In general, if you see a question sometime on the AP asking you to compare the French and the Russian Revolution, huge difference is the Russian Revolution is going to end the private ownership of property, and the French Revolution doesn't do that. But one nod towards government interference, sort of a mercantilist type of behavior, is limiting the price of bread for the sake of the urban poor. Why the Reign of Terror, and why this more violent phase of the later French Revolution? Well, the short answer is war. The French have preemptively struck against Prussia and Austria, and France is at war with just about all their neighbors at this time. And there is civil war in the Vendée, and I believe we saw in one of the videos we watched about 30,000 dead French soldiers, about 100,000 French citizens, civilians. This is a bloody war in western France. So as there's this fear that the revolution might get snuffed out from within, and certainly with these large armies on the borders of France attacking, there's going to be the hunting down of those who are disloyal, who are not backers of the revolution. And you see this in the September massacres. This is where about 1,200 aristocrats and clergymen and suspicious people have been thrown into jail in Paris, and they're going to be dragged out, and they are going to be executed and bludgeoned and stabbed and beaten to death in the streets of Paris. And this is going eventually to lead to the arrest and guillotining of many tens of thousands more in what's called the Red Terror. Jean-Paul Marat is the newspaper editor of the Ami des Peuples, and I'm probably not saying that right. It's, I think, French for people, the friend of the people. It's a newspaper, but it's a revolutionary rag here, which is calling for the death of, and it's listing the names of people who should die. And the Death of Marat painting is another painting by David. It's one of these sort of neoclassical paintings, which is glorifying the French as the new Greeks or the new Romans, glorifying democracy. And in this painting, Marat has been stabbed. He's been assassinated in a medicinal bath in his bathtub, and he is supposed to look kind of like Jesus in the Pietà by Michelangelo. He's this, he's in this pose where he's dead, and he's a martyr, and he's been stabbed for the sake of, he's died for the sake of liberty, at least in this painting, if you read it that way. The person who stabbed him is a Girondist, Charlotte Corday, this woman who saw him as anything but a revolutionary saint or a martyr. She saw him as a villain. The Committee of Public Safety is given the job by the National Convention when France is in the midst of war to look for counter-revolutionaries. And the leader is Maximilien Robespierre. And, they're looking for subversives, and there's a lot of people that they're arresting. There are opponents to the revolution, but they arrest people who are insufficiently enthusiastic. They arrest people who, use monsieur instead of citizen. And, they're just looking for people who, they suspect of being opponents. Some religious changes. The National Assembly is going to pass the civil constitution of the clergy, where the government takes over the clergy of the Catholic Church. Catholic Church clergy have to take an oath of allegiance, and if they don't, they lose their jobs, they lose their pensions, and all church property is confiscated by the national government. And assignats are this paper money, which is being used as currency, and this money is being backed by the real estate, by the property of the church, monasteries and church grounds and lands. And the government is allowing the people to elect the priests and the bishops. The convention is that later phase of the revolution where this anti-clerical regime is going to be a regime that tries to de-Christianize France. And the convention is going to declare a cult of reason, a cult of the supreme being, and Notre Dame is going to be turned into a temple of reason, and priests are going to be killed by the thousands. Mock baptisms, basically drownings with hands tied behind their backs. They're going to be blown away with cannons, and the revolution is going to do away with there's going to be a metric week and a metric calendar, and the purpose is to get rid of Sunday, to get rid of all religious holidays, and to secularize time itself. And then when Napoleon comes in, after the revolution, comes to power in 1799, he's going to come up with a concordat with the Catholic Church, in which he is going to allow shared power over the appointment of clergy. This is really the best that the Vatican is going to get at this point, but it's much better than having your cathedrals desecrated and your priests literally blown away. Napoleon is going to allow that Catholicism is the religion of the majority of the French people, and he's going to continue to allow freedom of religion for Protestants and Jews, like the Declaration of Man and Citizen did, and that's another thing that's passed by the National Assembly. Napoleon's contradictions, well, the guy is a tyrant. He's a dictator. He crowns himself emperor. He invades all these countries. Millions of people will die during the Napoleonic Wars. This is including, of course, famine and disease and just, suffering that comes through warfare, but a lot of death in Europe. But he does spread these Napoleonic, these French revolutionary values through what's called the Code Napoleon, or the Napoleonic Code. And this code is going to declare, it's going to abolish serfdom, it's going to say that all men are equal before the law, it's going to allow freedom of religion. A lot of French revolutionary values are going to be very gratefully adopted by places that are taken over, but he will awaken nationalism in Germany in particular. And when Napoleon goes down, it's going to be a combined German and Russian Austrian army that is going to march into Paris and send him into exile. The Code Napoleon, this is this code that ends against serfdom, it enacts illegal equality, access to jobs, religious freedom. These are values of the French Revolution. Napoleon, even though he's an emperor and dictator before that, he sees himself as a loyal son of the revolution. He was a supporter of the revolution. He fought for the revolutionary government. Napoleon in Germany he conquers Germany and he arouses German nationalism. The 3rd of May, 1808, this is a romantic painting by Francisco Goya. And it's an interesting painting. The French are executing a bunch of Spanish guerrillas in a courtyard with the church in the background. And the painting is bathed in artificial light. And that artificial light, is supposed to represent the light of reason. And instead of the light of reason being something good that brings freedom and justice and fresh air, it's bringing an atrocity. And the church, which should be the source of spiritual liberty and freedom, is in darkness because of these revolutionary French soldiers. So it's looking at the French Revolution in a totally different way. That reason is suspect, and that faith and the church and Catholicism is what is good, but what has been snuffed out here. Differences and similarities between the French Revolutionary and the earlier English Civil War. Some things that are the same. The King of England, Charles, gets into trouble. He needs to tax. He's been in a bunch of expensive wars. And the regime of Louis XVI also needs to tax after some ruinous wars. Charles I is executed by a parliamentary army, and King Louis XVI is executed eventually by the National Convention. Charles I signs a Petition of Rights, and later on, after the English Revolution, when William and Mary come over, they sign a Bill of Rights, and the new National Assembly passes a Declaration of Rights. Things that are different: France has an extraordinary reign of terror. About 40,000 people die in a summer of just insane butchery. You don't have something really on this scale in England. You don't have the winners, just having an all-out, killing of their enemies when war is over. You have a dictatorship and an emperorship under Napoleon. He's going to shut down this participatory government. This does not happen in England after Oliver Cromwell dies and Parliament is restored by Charles II. And you have a very brutal attack on the church under the later phase of the French Revolution. Although Cromwell did impose a Puritan dictatorship, and after the Glorious Revolution, there were restrictions on the participation by non-Anglicans in the British government. But the attack on the church, the desecration of Notre Dame, the killing of priests by the thousands, the changing of the calendar and the days of the week, this is all something of an extraordinary assault on the Catholic Church itself. So these are some thoughts on what we've been going over. Do look over this review sheet. Look over your notes and be sure you've read the book and highlighted and marked that up. And good luck, citizens.